Two things you need to know about the gospel. First of all, it's hard. Paul says in Ephesians 4 to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Here in Ephesians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul is addressing something that's really tough about the gospel. It's this idea that part of the gospel means changing yourself. It means giving up things you do that you really like and that you want to do. He says that it's actually like we're becoming entirely new people. Like there was an old me before I came to Jesus, and then there's a new me that has changed because I learned about Jesus and realized that I needed to obey him. And to be fair, people try to reinvent themselves all the time, so you may wonder, how is this any different? Well, this new me isn't just me figuring out what I feel like being and then changing myself into that. Paul says that the new self of someone who has come to Jesus is created after the likeness of God, in true righteousness and holiness. So what he's saying is that the gospel calls us to give up what we want and to become new people, people whose lives are now centered around what God considers true and right and holy. And honestly, at least for me, there is so much that I have to give up that I want to do because it just isn't what God considers true, right, and holy. And that's tough. I struggle with it daily. And maybe it even seems impossible to you. Like maybe you're thinking, even if I wanted to change like that, I don't think I could. And on our own, it would be impossible. But Paul says that our new self has been created after the likeness of God. That's the same way that humans are described when God first created them in Genesis chapter 1 in the very beginning. And what that tells us is that the gospel doesn't just call us to try to do this on our own. It calls us to submit to God as he recreates us in his own image, just as he did in the beginning. But even still, he calls us to continually choose him, and not to choose the things that appeal to us, but to him are wrong, evil, and unholy. And the truth is, that's hard. It just is. And it's going to continue to be hard because there's an adversary, Satan, who is actively, constantly trying to get you to choose yourself instead of God. It's hard. And so maybe you're wondering at this point, is he trying to convince me to give up on the gospel? And my answer, of course, is not at all. Because even though what the gospel calls us to is hard, there's something else you need to know about the gospel. And that's that it's worth it. In the same book of Ephesians, Paul says this, "But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness toward us in Christ Jesus." God made us alive. In other words, he recreated us in his image, like our previous verse said, and he did this for a reason. Not to make us miserable, not to make us hate our lives, and not to make us give up either. The Apostle Paul says God did this so that in times to come, he could show us the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness toward us in Jesus. He wants to show us greater grace, greater kindness than we have ever known. And this is just what it takes for him to be able to do that. First of all, it took his son sacrificing himself and dying for us, and he did that. And second, it takes us giving up what we want in order to do what God says is true, right, and holy. And that's a high cost to pay. But you know why it's so costly? Because it's worth the price. It's worth it. Giving up whatever we have to give up so that we can experience God's grace and God's kindness will be worth it. And all throughout the Bible, God shows us that even when he makes an enormous promise, like that it will be worth it, he can keep his promise and he will keep his promise. So, two things you need to know about the gospel. Yeah, it's hard, but it's worth it. If you want to know more, drop a comment below and I'd love to chat with you. Or if you found this video interesting or even helpful, maybe hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. That helps a lot. Thanks for thinking through all this with me. I'll see you later.